I'd like to introduce someone who I've had the privilege of actually being taken around Big Bend State Park by. I had gone there looking for a particular cactus, and when I hit the office, Gary, who was wonderful, took us and showed us. So I'd like to introduce Gary Fred. He's been fascinated, like many of us, since a boy when he was growing up at 9 years old in the San Angelo area of Texas. After he retired, he spent 15 years guiding people through the park as a volunteer. He's given tours, documented the region's breathtaking landscapes, and, among other things, the cacti. He's written extensively about the ecology of the Chihuahuan Desert, and you will see his passion for both the flora and the geography of the region. And by way of background, we are talking about the Texas State Park at Big Bend, the Warnock Park, which, if you know anything about Texas, you know the Big Bend Park, that's national, which is the least visited national park in the country. Well, even less known is the state park, which is the least visited state park in Texas. And with that, I'll turn you over so Gary can explain this gem to you. Gary, would you share your screen, please?
Share the screen. Right. Okay, here we go. Cross your fingers. Viola.
Here you go.
There you go. And I'm going to mute myself and shut down my video during the talk.
Okay, well, thanks for that introduction. It makes me sound a lot better than I thought I was. So, and yes, I did. My reason for being here is that I have spent a lot of time in the state park. Actually, I was the first person in Texas to go when the park opened to the public. Formerly it was a natural area and you had to be in a guided tour. And I hiked the Rancherias Trail, and that's where I fell in love with the place. So, like I said, this is all located in the Big Bend region, and it's the largest state park in Texas. It is larger than all of the other state parks put together, and it is also the least visited, possibly because it's just so hard to get to. And already I find a slide missing. Now what am I going to do? Well, say, you know where the parks are. I don't know what to do about that.
Well, just explain and then we'll go over it.
It will go over it, and I may be able. It may have gotten. I don't know. It shouldn't have moved. This is the right one. Anyway, yeah. Both of these parks are in the Big Bend region. You might think that because they're in the same area, that they are that they would be very much alike, but they are not. They are very different. The Big Bend Ranch State Park was created by volcanic activity. The biggest volcano in the area was the Chinati volcano, which is about 30 miles to the west. This was an explosive eruption. It's believed to be the largest volcanic eruption ever to have happened in North America. It was more than 1,000 times bigger than Mount St. Helens, and it put out so much lava that this stuff spread out for miles and miles and miles, and including all the area of the park here. In the middle of the park, there's a Mount Oso, and this was more an intrusive volcano of the kind that we're seeing in, say, Iceland today, where the soil surface I mean, the crust has split, and lava is working its way out, but it's not exploding. Um, Ultimately, by the time that all that activity was over, um, the area was buried in about 2,500 feet of solid rock. So the result of that is that nearly everything here is in uh, igneous soils. So, but a lot of plants that your guides will say live happily in only live in limestone. It's not true. They live in the igneous soils as well. So we'd be looking. That doesn't even well, okay. We'll be looking at the items in terms of kind of their location. I should point out that Highway 170, which was declared by National Geographic Society to be the most scenic highway in North America. The park has around 20 or 30 miles of riverfront property. And along the way there, aside from a beautiful drive, there are several places you can stop, hike, and what have you. And there's good camping there. Later, we'll go into the Bofacillas Mountains, which is the central volcanic activity of the park. On the way, we will pass through areas that are known as the contrabando lowlands, and these occur when a large valley exists, and the valley fills up with the rubble that is eroded from the mountains on either side. And because both of these volcanoes went through periods of lava and periods of tuff, the clay, I mean, the sand, the soil there is nearly always sand and clay and gypsum. And that's a very challenging place to for plants to make a living. Uh, anyway, and as we said before, maybe I'll find it later, there is a circular structure, a large ancholith in the far eastern side of the park. Uh, you you could possibly reach the rim on an ordinary, well, at least a high clearance pickup. The Solitario covers about 52 square miles. It's about 7 to 10 miles in diameter. Um, and it happened when a fault in the crust allowed lava to seep up and lift the limestone that was above it. And it lifted that to a really sharp, acute angle until the limestone failed. And when that happened, there was a kind of a dome in the middle, and it collapsed. So now what we have left is this interesting kind of ring, a big, huge round ring, and you can see a formation called flat irons. Though there are flat irons all over the world, and they are limestone, and their erosional items also wind up in Fresno Canyon. And those are the only two places that you're going to find limestone in the park. Um, I'll skip that. So let's go ahead and look at the cacti. Uh, um, we're dividing them into two subfamilies. I remember when I was a boy, the Opuntia were just a cactus, but now they're in Opuntioideae, and the rest of them are Cactoideae. And we have both in the state park. Um, looking at each one, the Opuntioideae are normally known as prickly pears, and their one distinguishing feature is that they have. Oh, I'm supposed to be doing something here. There we go. Is that they have glockids, and the glockids are these very tiny hair-like spines. They're barbed. They get into your skin. You may think you can pull them out, but you can't because some of them is going to be left behind. A few people have allergic reactions. I don't know if it's to the cactus or to the stuff that accumulates on the spines, but they're very annoying. Uh, So when we look at the Opuntioideae, there are really three subfamilies of those that are worth mentioning. One is the Plata Opuntioideae. They're over here on the left, and they're characterized by their flat stems. And nearly everybody calls these things pads. They can be a very large cactus, but they're usually not more than, say, 5 feet tall at the most. They're the choyas, and there are two of those, just a choya, they all have elongated and cylindrical stems. Here are examples of each of the three. The one on the left is Cylindro Opuntia imbricata. It has a dozen popular names out here. It's a big plant. It's usually when you see it, it'll be somewhere around 4 to 6 feet tall. Its spines are about 3/4 of an inch in diameter, at least if it's had any rain. Um, and it, as well as all of these cylindropuntias, are not quite as common as the other opuntias or either other cacti. The Corinna aguerrea, these are the dog choyas, and as you can see, they're just beautiful little bloomers. And but this whole plant never gets much above, say, 3 to 5 inches tall. But they do grow out in large mats, and their stems are only about half an inch in diameter. And then on the right is one of the most widely hated cacti in the park, the Cylindropuntia leptocaulus. This plant, even when it's, as the one is illustrated here, fat and sassy, the stems are about 1/4 of an inch around. And the flowers on this one are kind of a greenish yellow. People hate it because all the spines are hooked, and the plant is difficult to see as it's often growing under nurse plants. And if it gets caught in you, well, you will take it and the stem it's attached to with you. And that, in fact, is the reproductive strategy of all the cylindrical opuntias. We're going to look next at the platypunches, or the prickly pears, and I'm making an arbitrary distinction here. It's all my own, and it's just based on color. One of the reasons I do this, that when visitors come to the park, nearly everyone notices these purple prickly pears, and they don't know why. Sometimes they identify and say, well, that's a prickly pear, but it must be diseased or stressed. Or others just don't even think it's a prickly pear. But these are naturally purple. And not only that, because all of the prickly pears are really quite variable, except a few of the purple ones. But the differences can have you down counting spines and that sort of thing with the green ones, whereas the purple ones, the differences are visibly quite obvious, and you don't have to look very far to find it. Looking at the green ones, certainly my favorite one is on the left. It's Opuntia rufida, and it's a good solid green. And one of the most common ones, it's much more common in the national park, is the Opuntia comanchica. And it's a much smaller plant. And I don't think it's quite as common as some of the others in the Big Bend Ranch State Park, but it's very definitely common in the Big Bend. The rufida is a really unique cactus. Its defining characteristics, I suppose, it has no spines at all except for glochids. And that gives this plant kind of a soft touch. And there are glochids around the edges and around all the tubercles too. This plant is located at the extreme northern edge of its territory. It grows much better further south in Mexico. But if you see it, you are in the Big Bend. It doesn't make it out of this region ever at all. And a nice thing about it in some ways is that it favors steep, rocky habitat. We've got plenty of that. It often looks like it's just growing out of the rock. In fact, when you're going down the scenic highway, you will see them apparently just popping out of the sides of the cliffs. It's certainly a beautiful plant. It blooms in yellow and sometimes this delicious kind of peach color, and it blooms abundantly. This is one, if I were keeping them at home, I would want to have one, but it wouldn't make it here. The next one is the Opuntia comanchica. This is the Comanche prickly pear, and it's a much smaller plant. I don't think I've ever seen one much taller than knee height, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall. It also is a very good bloomer. And as you can see from the fruit, it's pretty productive that way. Its most distinguishing characteristic is that it usually looks like some of the pads have lost a lot of their stems. And here's one, and you can see there are stems up around the edge, spines up around the edge, and none in the middle. And there's none on here or down here. And that just I don't know what removes the spines, but that is really very common sort of thing. And if they when they have spines at all, is that these spines are always located at the distal end of the pad. These flowers are yellow with red centers, and it's not very picky about habitat, but it will not grow in grasslands or woodlands. Everything else, it doesn't really seem to care, but it really does like particularly well-drained gravel soils. Well, I touched the mouse, dear me. Uh, the third one is a prickly pear that's common all over the United States. It's probably the most common prickly pear, and its most characteristic feature is its 3 spines, and they're all pointed down as like a bird's foot, and and I think this is about the only one that consistently grows that way. It has yellowish, usually yellow flowers, but a lot of the peach colored and oranges ones come out. There is another variety of this, but I don't think anybody's ever going to see it, so we won't go into it. Now let's look at the purple prickly pears, because everybody loves them. These plants are purple because they produce beta-cyanin pigments in their tissues, and this pigment gives them their striking color. The pigment is protective against ultraviolet and other forms of stress as well. The most common variety of the purple prickly pear is the Opuntioideae, and it's the variety Diplopurpurea, and it has extraordinarily long spines. This is one of those plants, and you can see it's got pretty long spines. There's another purple, and there are a few varieties of that, and there's another purple variety that's a Xeria of the Parva variety. I put this up to give you an idea of the variation, the levels of variation that can happen in prickly pears. The one on the right, I think this may be the spiniest one I've ever seen. These spines were over 2 inches in some places, which gives the plant really a deadly looking appearance, doesn't it? The one on the left is much younger, and it may become spinier as it grows up, but you'll see a lot of these too. And as you can see from the soil, they're just fine in these clay, very badly drained soils with a lot of gypsum. It just doesn't bother them at all. But they're equally happy in more well-drained spines. These plants keep their color all the time. Now the color may fade when we have a lot of good rain and they're really fat and growing quickly, but it never goes away. Flowers are also yellow, and like many, they have red centers. Here's another Azuria thought I'd show, just it makes the length of the spines much clearer. I mean, they are enormous. And not all of them have spines that turn white on the ends, but they can do that. The common one that's supposedly the most common in the Big Bend area is the Opuntioideae of the parva variety. And like I say, the field guides will tell you that it's more common everywhere, but I don't think that's true in the park. It's a fairly small cactus. This is another one that you won't see really much bigger than knee height. And again, this is the parva has a lot of missing spines, as you can see. The color, if the color is faded at all, faded, and it often is, it remains concentrated around the aureole. So that's all these little bright colored spots. Moving on to the Cactoideae, we've got 12 families of these. It's the largest genre in the park, and we're just going to go through them in no particular order, but I'll separate them out by subfamily. The first one I put in just gets as my favorite cactus on the planet. This is Areocarpus fissuratus, variety fissuratus. This cactus is made of really many flat, spineless, gray-green stems that grow from a very large and deep taproot. So this is one of the few cacti that live on taproots. The tubercles themselves overlap, and and that's what these little white bumps are, and they arrange themselves into this kind of star-shaped pattern. This guy really loves barren hills, desert scrub. It'll live in limestone or clay and gypsum. I think I see it most often in well-drained igneous soils. I don't think it's recognized yet as threatened, but it should be. About 10 years ago, we caught a gang of cactus thieves who had robbed from the parks and private owners over 5,000 of these plants. And I participated in a program to help rehome several of them. And I guess handling all of them and taking them around to people and showing them maybe is why I'm so crazy about them. Then amongst the Coryphantha, I'm only going to show us two of these. One of them is the Coryphantha macromeris, and I believe this one's called the nipple cactus. I'm not sure. But your field guides will say that you can identify any Mammillaria by the existence of grooves in the tubercle. But I have found that is not always the case. And in fact, the tubercle usually doesn't even develop its grooves until it's sexually mature. It is really much more common on level plains. This one I moved because it was in the middle of a little road that took us to the back of the barn, and people were always running over it. I planted it in a better soil, but the substrate is still that clay, sandy clay, and gypsum. The Robusta variety doesn't look anywhere near like that, but it's also fairly easily identified. One thing is you'll notice that the radial stems are all oppressed. They lay out kind of flat, and then the main stem is always just one, and it's always correct. So when you look at it, people say, well, that looks like a sea urchin, and that has kind of become its popular name. Then we have a couple of members of the echinocactus. Of course, my favorite one is the horizonthalis. That's, I believe, called an eagle claw. This is a globular cactus. It's I've seen it maybe as big as 10 or 12 inches, but that's extremely unusual. These are usually around 6 inches or so, and the die-off is quite a lot. The others don't seem to get to be that old. But it too, it's not prickly about its environment, but it's difficult to photograph the flowers because on any individual plant, the blossom doesn't open till 3 or 4 in the afternoon at the heat of the day. And then it starts closing before the sun even starts setting. It's just as soon as the sun's really low, the blossom starts closing, and it does not reopen the next day. So you have a little window of 7, 8, 9 hours per year to photograph this plant in bloom. Fortunately, there's a whole lot of them, and the flower really stands out when it's in bloom. So when I learned that, I was able to get more pictures. The one on the right is the Echinocactus texensis, and this is known as the horse crippler. And you can tell from the just extremely large and grooved and banded and reinforced spines that these spines are serious. They will not come off under any condition. And this plant is, I don't know, in my opinion, it's almost rare in the plant, but you can see one in the Barton Warnock Center Cactus Garden. And that's where I took this picture because it's the biggest one I've ever seen in the park. I've never seen it on anything but flat, level terrain. But the field guides tell me that it'll grow on the lower slopes of mountains, but I just haven't found it yet. The plant is really enjoyed by people who like to keep cactus and others as well. I have a friend who doesn't know anything about cacti, and he's got 3 of these. And the reason is it does well in cultivation. It's very cold hardy. Even if it's in a pot, very low temperatures won't kill it. And on top of that, if you have a long rainy spell, it doesn't rot. So, and it gets its name horse crippler from the fact that if you're out riding and your horse steps on this, it may cripple the horse. And usually, as you know, for a horse, once it's crippled, you usually put it down. Another local favorite, and it's quite abundant in this area, it's a ribbed cactus, the Chinocerius, and this particular one is known popularly as a strawberry pitaya. You'll notice the spines always grow from the edges. The spines and tubercles always grow from the edges of the ridges, but the flowers, when they're there, come out of any part of the epidermis whatsoever. Of course, they have a very they're never very tall. Maybe a foot. This one might have been a foot tall, but they can really spread out and form very large colonies, and they're quite visible when they're in bloom. The particular variety we are looking at here, well, and there's another slide missing. I have never mind. Or do I? Well, no, here they are. I'm sorry. Then there are 2 others, one of which is very common, and you're almost certain to see it. And one of them is a little more picky about where it lives. The one on the left is the Echinocereus viridiflorus, and this one is a variety called Rhasanthus, and it's because of these dark wine red flowers. Never seen them any other color. And the center part of the flower is green, which kind of bears witness to its Echinocereus parenthood. There are several varieties of this, and I just didn't think that we could look at all of them. Some of them are anyway. The spines, as you can see, are extremely thin. Even the main spines are thin, and they're flexible, and they won't hurt you. They really like higher altitudes, so you're not probably going to find them until you're up in the mountains, and they'd really rather have a little more water than everybody else. So you'll often find them growing in rock ferns and moss and things like that. So you're not going to find it very often. However, everywhere in the park you're going to find this Echinocerius dasycanthus, and it usually blooms with yellow flowers. If I touch this mouse, everything goes away. Okay. Um, and I've made up two slides for this one. It gets a name. It's called the Texas rainbow cactus, and that's because of these bands that grow up and down the stem. This is by far the most common appearance you'll see of the plant. The bands are formed by the weather in the area. So you have a very dry year or two in a row, the plant grows almost none at all. And so in the next growth, the little ring gets spread out and forms these rings, and the rings can even be slightly different colors at times. When the rain happens, it starts growing right away, and the new growth is always with white spines and this lovely pink reddish top. Uh, However, it will grow under nurse plants. It'll grow in shade. And when that happens, though, everyone I've seen in a shady location or even partially shady location doesn't seem to develop the bands at all. And it's just kind of a snow white. And this one is one of those varieties of flowers. I call that peach. It's a very pale orange. Then we have one plant we briefly touched on earlier, and another we haven't talked about yet. But both of these, everybody just calls them strawberry pitayas, um, and it's because they both produce very large fruits. They're very sweet. They're better anything in the grocery store, and they have purplish interiors with black seeds. It blooms somewhere from March to May. Uh, the the Pausa spinus is the one we saw a little bit earlier, and you can see the spines are really pretty far apart, and so you can see the flesh of the plant really quite easily. But the grand champion is the Stramineus variety, and this plant is really an amazing blooming plant. But I don't see people keeping it in cultivation very much because it's pretty prickly. This particular one is growing in an area that has actually, this was a parking lot. It has a, that clay popping, and the underneath is flat and clay, but and they've thrown rocks and gravel out on it, but it's just fine. You can see it's blooming really quite well, and this one will also produce more fruits. Now we're coming to another big favorite. Um, I tried to include cacti that were common enough. If you're just there for 3 or 4 days, I was pretty sure you'd be able to see one. This is not one of them, but I can't help it. It's one of my favorites, and it's an absolutely beautiful little cactus. It's the Viridiflorus varcanus, and it's extremely rare. When I came to the park, it was only known to grow on two hilltops, and we're not talking about large hills, two small hilltops. But during another hike with a botanist friend at one time, we found another one in an area that was another colony that was growing on kind of a mound of red volcanic rubble. Um, it prefers, in fact, it lives, we believed until then that it will only grow in novaculi. And of course, we like it because these small cylindrical stems and so many spines, it just looks snow white. Um, and when they're juveniles, you can't even see the spines. They're all covered with trichomes, so it's a very hairy kind of looking plant. Another nice thing about the flowers is they're an unusual greenish yellow, even for a Chinocerius. Uh, and I'm told, I can't smell anything much these days, but they're supposed to be lemon scented. And these are pollinated by bees and butterflies. So if you were there during the day, you might actually see that happening. The smallest plants in the park, of course, are the Epithelantha, and they are generally considered, most of them are considered to be infrequent to locally common. Um, I would say they're kind of infrequent. Well, no, the Micromeris variety actually does. If you see one of them, you will probably see half dozen or more or so, and it frequently grows under a nurse plant or in some other sort of shade. And you can see it looks prickly. Again, all the radial spines are oppressed. The central ones are, though, not particularly prominent. And so and if you touch this plant, it's definitely hurty. Um, Now, the Epithelantha boki is a different story altogether. This one, uh, it really does prefer limestone soils. I've seen it on sandstones, but most of them I've seen have been in limestone and have been growing on the sides of the Solitario or down in Fresno Creek. Um, it has a very smooth look, and it's worth touching because it actually feels a little rough, but definitely smooth. Neither one of these ever grow to be columnar. But again, if you see one, you might see 5 or 6 in that immediate area. Next, I'm on the edge of catching hiccups. We have a couple of Escobaria. One is tuberculosa. This one is much more common. It's common throughout Presidio, southern Presidio and Brewster County. Um, it's been moved to another designation at some point, but nearly everything that was in that designation has been moved back. So I'm leaving it where it is, assuming it's probably going to come back one day. It's not heavily spined, but it's a good bloomer, and these little pink flowers are really just lovely. The plant will grow up, and sometimes it will just fall over. Um, uh, and so you'll see it laying on the ground, but there'll always be some standing up otherwise. I'm going to go through 4 of the Mammillaria. We'll start with the Lasiacantha. There are distinguishing characteristics of that. The main one is that all the flowers always have these ribs down the middle. Now, the color of the ribs varies substantially, but that's one thing that it always has. Whereas the Potsii has much more consistent blossom colors, and I've actually read in sedimentary that it's largely confined to sedimentary habitats. That's also not necessarily true. Uh, I but I will say that in those habitats, you're most likely to find one at the base of medium-sized boulder or larger. And I don't know, usually it shades, it's big enough that it completely shades one side of the plant or another. And these flowers are always that dark red with the yellow stamens. But you'll also find it out in the open. But I just noticed at least half of them that I've ever seen were growing at the base of some boulder. So it's worth kind of scoping that out. There are 2 other mammillarias, which I think are rather interesting in general, because they're flat. I might have called them a pancake mammillaria. They never grow to be very tall. Even this one on the left, which was probably 6, 7 inches in diameter, was barely 2 inches tall. The Mayacantha is distinguished by having usually 6 spines growing from each tubercle and no more. The radial spine, and they're about the same size. So the radial and central spines are all pretty much the same size. The hatery, on the other hand, is less frequent, but it has a lot more flowers. And the flowers tend to vary in color from one place to another. But the hatery is usually a pale salmon color like this one. uh, whereas the Mayacantha is nearly always yellow. We have two barrel cacti in the area. Uh, One is the Cactus hematocanthus. It's the largest barrel cactus in the park, and it is commonly called the Texas giant barrel cactus. Mature plants have red radial spines, and they're thick enough until they spread out that it gives the plant this very faint pinkish cast from a distance. The central spines often turn kind of yellowish. They're very large, and they have hooks on the end. See that? You don't want to play with those hooks. The flowers, I believe, are always yellow. I even grew a few of these in the park, and they came out all yellow. They bloom in midsummer. The fruits are rather large, about the size of a large date, and they take a very long time to mature, but they're a deep wine red, and they have scalloped markings on the sides. It's an interesting way to find them if you're not on one of these clay flats, is to look at tall cliffs as you're driving by or out hiking, because they seem to like those tall cliffs. And if you're going to see any cacti at all other than a prickly pear, it will probably be this one. And so that's just a place to look. I think that's the first one that was ever pointed out to me. I don't know how far away I was from it, but weren't close. Oh, and this plant can get to be fairly large. I would say, well, in my case, they're about halfway between my knee and maybe my calf. So what, 2, 3 feet tall? They get to be very, very large. But our other barrel cactus is Glandula cactus incinatus of the Righty variety. And it is widespread. It's considered to be common, but you'd be amazed how often you'll never see it. And the reason is it really insists on having a very sheltered habitat. So if it's growing on say a creosote bush, and you happen to be close to the bush, you won't be able to see it because you can't see through the canopy of the bush. Its flowers are always this maroonish red color, and actually its fruit looks a bit like the giant thing. But these little red marks here are actually well, they're tepals, and they're separated in this particular instance. So that it's really a very, very lovely plant. And another characteristic that's unique to this one is that both the radial spines and the central spines are hooked. So here you can see these central spines. By the way, I just noticed there's a little fly or a bee up on that one, but they're a little bit hooked even down at the base of the plant. This is significantly smaller than the giant fishhook cactus that it looks like. It's really pretty. So, when you find it, you should go poking around under the bushes because you may find one there. Um, uh, I would say that this cactus is uncommon through most of its range, but it does seem to grow just everywhere, absolutely everywhere. The only one I know you can see reliably is, again, in the cactus garden at the Barton Warnock Center. This particular cactus, I think, was in cultivation in the cactus greenhouse of BBR, the Big Bend Research Institute. The one thing that's visually distinctive right away, is that it's spirally, and it spirals up. Now, the tubercles are arranged in maybe 8 to 13 rows, but they never form ribs. So you can see, especially here, where they're separated by the white fur, they are separate, but they nevertheless they always grow in this kind of spiral pattern. And another thing about it that's fairly unique is that the radial spines are white. Maybe as they age, they get a little more yellowish, but they're basically white. But the central spines are much longer and they are black. So uh, that makes it kind of unique looking if you run into it when it's not blooming. And I've mentioned quite often the plant will maintain trichomes on at the apex of the stem for quite a long time. But actually, as it gets older, you see that gets lesser and lesser and lesser. Another big favorite in Texas is the Theliocactus by color. And several Texas sources I've encountered say that this is the most beautiful cactus flower in the state of Texas. And I gotta say, it's big, it's brilliant. Every blossom lasts for 2 or 3 days. And the plant itself is even beautiful. Trouble is, collectors absolutely love it because the flowers are so beautiful, and it's being seriously poached everywhere. It really does very well in sedimentary flats that, again, it likes rocky hillsides too, but most of them I've seen have been in the sedimentary flats. So we know that it tolerates clay, and we know that it tolerates gypsum more than many other cacti. And another thing, it tolerates some shade. So the one I had in cultivation in the garden there was shaded all afternoon because there was shade shelter over the parking area. Another favorite. Are all cactuses favorites? It could be. Anyway, this is a Pennicereus greggii. There are different ones of these all over the world, and they're almost invariably called night blooming cereus. This one is just fine on desert flats, benches. It'll live in grasslands, scrub, alluvial basins, just about anywhere. But you will never see this plant by itself. It's 90% of the time it's growing in a creosote bush. And that's because this is the stem, and it's maybe half an inch in diameter at its largest. And the spines are so small, you really can't see them without getting right up at them. And they're oppressed only in one direction, up and down the stem. Stem can't support itself. So if it comes up somewhere by itself, it will not make it. It will not grow to maturity because it will fall over. This plant is another one that blooms once a year and is even harder to find in bloom because the blossoms open not at dusk. They open when it's completely dark, and they remain open until a little before daybreak the next day, and then they close. So this is another, you have 7 or 8 hours of the year, but these are in the middle of the night to see and photograph this plant at all. I went out and sat with this plant for every night for over 2 weeks until this happened because I didn't know how big the buds should be. When it's blooming, it's very fragrant, and it's pollinated by a giant light-colored moth. I never got to identify it because, of course, it was flying around. But it's big enough that a couple times I thought it was a hummingbird. So it's a really large moth. The status of this plant was uncertain when I first came at the park. In fact, I couldn't find anybody who said they'd ever seen it. And one of the researchers of Solitario was out working every day for a year in the Solitario, and she didn't find it. But in 2012, we were having a training exercise for park rangers, and we brought in 2 or 3 rangers from every state park in Texas, and they came up to the Big Bend Ranch State Park for training. And part of what their stay was to include was getting out and going to all the say, tourist attractions, all the beautiful spots of the park, and to record what they were seeing. And that evening, they came back, and lo and behold, two rangers had found one each. So that we knew that there were at least two. One was even on the main road, but I had not seen it. The reason he saw it was the fruit. The fruit is, well, it's a fairly smallish pear, and it's pear shaped, and they're always bright red. They too don't last very long because they must be very tasty. They disappear off the bush in no time at all. When he said that he had seen this, I went out and found it so I could get this lovely red fruit. Um, and this was right on the main road. 2 or 3 years later, I came back and it wasn't there, and I don't know why. Um, but a man and his little girl, I think she was about 10, she was precocious. She was beyond genius, and she had one of those remarkable people who, who could spot an arrowhead in a bed of gravel at 100 yards. She saw better than anybody I'd ever seen. So when she was there, and I knew they were going to go out and go for a drive on the Oso Loop, I gave her some pictures of the cactus, and I said, "Would you please tell me if you see any of these on the way?" Well, she came back that evening after finishing the loop, and she said she had found 12 in the first mile of this drive. And she stopped counting after that because they didn't think they'd ever finish the drive if she got out and looked at all of them. So I have to conclude that this plant is actually uncommon at the least, and probably common. It's just invisible. Like see here in the picture with creosote, you'd never know there was a cactus in there. You just would. This was visible because this part of the plant was dead, so it was actually standing out. Um, so anyway, that's a real charmer, and certainly it was certainly worth staying up all those nights to get the picture because it is beautiful. Oh, and the flower is really big, it's really large. And that, my friends, is the end of the show.
Well, thank you. That was a marvelous presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.